It was my birthday, and I woke up with the same familiar sense of anticipation, though I wasn't expecting much. John, my husband, had never been one for grand gestures. His love was quieter, more subtle acts of service, like fixing something around the house or making sure my car was always in good condition. So when he got ready for work and left without even a hint that today was different, I wasn't surprised. Maybe a little disappointed, but not surprised. I went about my day as usual: work, emails, lunch at home by myself. I tried to keep busy, not letting my mind wander too much. Maybe he had something planned for later. We had been together long enough that I knew not to expect anything over the top. But still, a small part of me hoped he'd do something special this time. I couldn't shake the odd feeling I'd had for the last few weeks. Though, John had been acting slightly different, more secretive with his phone, texting more than usual. He'd laugh at something on the screen and then quickly put it away. When I asked about it, he'd just say, "Mark," referring to his best friend. They had always been close, so I didn't think much of it. But there was something in the way he'd say it that made me wonder if there was more. Mark had been part of our lives for years, almost like a brother to both of us. We'd spent countless weekends together, going on trips, dinners, game nights. He was practically family, and I trusted him completely. But lately, I had started noticing little things: subtle glances, lingering touches, moments that seemed just a bit too personal. Still, I brushed them off. They were friends, brothers, nothing more. The hours dragged on, and as the afternoon turned into evening, I told myself not to get my hopes up. It was just a birthday after all. Maybe John would come home with flowers. Maybe we'd have a quiet dinner at home. That would be enough. But something kept nagging at me, the same quiet voice that had been whispering in my ear for weeks. What if there was more going on? What if I was missing something right in front of me? I pushed the thoughts away, deciding I didn't want to spoil the day with baseless suspicions. This was my birthday, and I wanted to enjoy it no matter what happened. As the day came to a close, John finally came home, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. I greeted him with a smile, trying not to let my earlier disappointment show. But then something shifted. He asked me to wait for just a moment and disappeared into the other room. I sat there, confused, wondering what he was up to. Moments later, the door opened, and Mark walked in with John right behind him, both of them grinning. Before I could say anything, they guided me to the living room, and my eyes widened in shock. The room had been completely transformed. There were fairy lights hanging from the ceiling, candles flickering on every surface, and a table set for an intimate dinner. A beautifully wrapped gift was in the center of it all, and I could smell the delicious aroma of food cooking in the kitchen. I was stunned. I had no idea they had been planning this together. It wasn't like John to do something this elaborate, and I was touched that Mark had helped him pull it off. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at them, feeling overwhelmed by the effort they'd gone through to make me feel special. It wasn't just the decorations or the dinner, it was the thought behind it, the care they had taken to make this day memorable for me. The night unfolded like a dream. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to another year. John and Mark were in high spirits, joking around like they always did, but something about it felt different. There was an ease between them that I hadn't noticed before, a closeness that went beyond their usual banter. At first, I chalked it up to the excitement of pulling off the surprise, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Mark had always been charming, but tonight his attention was focused entirely on me. He complimented me at every turn, praising how beautiful I looked, how lucky John was to have me. It felt nice, of course, but it was also starting to feel a little too much. I noticed the way he would linger beside me, how his eyes would follow me whenever I moved, and John didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, he encouraged it, laughing along and nudging Mark whenever he made a flirty comment. As the night progressed, I found myself caught between two emotions, happiness from the thoughtful surprise and a growing unease that something wasn't right. But I pushed the feeling aside. I didn't want to ruin the evening by overthinking things. After all, they had done this for me. They had made me feel special. And that was what mattered, wasn't it? Still, the little moments between John and Mark kept playing in the back of my mind, the shared glances, the knowing smiles, the way they seemed perfectly in sync with each other. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I wasn't so sure. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The way Mark kept looking at me, the intensity in his gaze, it wasn't the usual lighthearted banter we were used to. And the way John interacted with him, almost too comfortable, too natural. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was overthinking things. But the unease only grew stronger as the evening went on. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the beautiful night they had planned. But small things kept standing out. When I excused myself to the bathroom, I noticed them whispering quietly, their heads close together, faces serious. The moment they saw me return, they pulled apart quickly, resuming their smiles and laughter. It was subtle, but enough to make me wonder what was going on between them. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. Later, as we sat down to eat, I found myself watching them more closely. The way Mark's hand brushed John's as he passed him a dish. The brief touch that lingered just a moment too long. John didn't react, but I did. It was a small thing, something I wouldn't have even noticed before. But now it felt like a clue, a tiny crack in the perfect evening they had created. The conversation continued, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was too distracted by the tension I felt building between the two of them. My stomach knotted as I began piecing together the small, odd moments I'd noticed over the past few weeks, the secretive texts, the inside jokes, the unexplained late nights, and now this sudden over-the-top birthday celebration, something that seemed too extravagant, too perfect to be real. I wanted to ask John what was going on, but the words stuck in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if I was reading too much into things? After all, this was supposed to be a celebration, but the doubt kept creeping in. The little moments piled up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. Something was happening, and I needed to know what. I excused myself again, this time heading outside to clear my head. The cool air hit my skin, but it didn't calm the storm brewing inside me. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was just being paranoid. But when I went back inside, I caught another whispered exchange between John and Mark. Their voices were low, their expressions tense. This time, I couldn't pretend it was nothing. Something was definitely going on, and I was done ignoring it. The joy of the evening faded, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The surprise had been beautiful, but now it felt like a cover, like they were hiding something from me. I didn't know what it was, but I was determined to find out. After a while, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tension in the room had grown too thick to ignore, and I needed answers. I turned to John, my voice steady but my heart racing. What's going on? Something doesn't feel right. He looked at me, startled, like he hadn't expected me to notice. What do you mean? He asked, his tone defensive, which only made me more suspicious. My eyes flicked over to Mark, who suddenly seemed uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. I don't know. The way you two have been acting lately. The whispers. The looks. Is there something you're not telling me? I could hear the crack in my own voice, a mixture of fear and anger rising in my chest. John exchanged a quick glance with Mark, and that's when I knew for sure something was definitely wrong. They were hiding something from me. Something big. The silence between us stretched on, thick and heavy, before John finally sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, he started, hesitating. There's something we've been meaning to talk to you about, but we didn't know how. I felt the room closing in around me. What is it? I pressed, bracing myself for whatever was coming. John looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Mark, on the other hand, stayed silent, his expression unreadable. I didn't understand why, but it was clear that whatever was happening involved both of them. The pit in my stomach tightened as I waited for John to continue. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, John spoke again. Mark and I, it's complicated. His words hung in the air, vague and unsatisfying. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Complicated? How? I asked, my voice sharper now, demanding answers. John swallowed hard, his face pale. We've been seeing each other, he said quietly. The words were barely audible, but they hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. It didn't make sense. Seeing each other? I repeated, the disbelief thick in my voice. What do you mean? Seeing each other? Mark finally spoke, his voice calm but filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It's been going on for a while, he admitted, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and something else. Something I didn't want to understand. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The room spun, and I struggled to catch my breath. All those little moments, Mark's lingering looks, the secretive texts, John's sudden distance, everything clicked into place. My husband and his best friend had been lying to me, not just about some fling, but about a relationship that had been happening right under my nose. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else, not to me. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. John looked at me, his face full of regret. A year, he whispered. A full year of lies, of betrayal. I stared at both of them, feeling like a fool, crushed by the weight of their deception. All the while, they had made me feel like I was part of something special, only to find out I was the one being played. I stood there, speechless, as the reality of what they had done settled over me. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of their betrayal sank in. The world around me seemed to blur, and the weight of their deceit was almost too much to bear. I had spent so many years trusting them both, believing in the bond we shared, only to find out it was all a lie. My heart ached as I struggled to process everything they had hidden from me. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask them 1,000 questions. But all I could do was stand there, feeling numb and lost. They had stolen my trust, shattered everything I thought I knew, and I wasn't sure how to move forward from this. How could I ever look at them the same way again? After what felt like an eternity, I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked out of the room. I needed space, time to think, to figure out what my next step would be. Everything had changed in an instant, and now I had to find the strength to rebuild. If you've ever been in a situation where trust has been broken, you know how devastating it can be. But in moments like this, it's important to remember that you are strong, and you will find a way to heal, even if it feels impossible right now. If you want to hear more stories like this, or need a place to share your own experiences, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me. Thanks for being here. And remember, you're never alone in facing life's challenges.